you.
Information, education, and entertainment, all right here on the Sal Vella Show. Hello, everybody. I'm Sal Vella, and welcome to our show. Our guest is author and professor of history at Bentley College, Joyce Malcom, and we're going to be talking about her recent and riveting book, Guns and Violence. And can guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens actually be a deterrent to crime and violence? Joyce, welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Professor Malcom, your book, Guns and Violence, a provocative title, a controversial topic. Tell us about it.
Well, there are three different theories. There's a theory that Massachusetts and some other states follow, that more guns in private hands mean more crime. There's a theory that more guns in private hands means less crime because they are a deterrent. And then there's the possibility that they really aren't the key factor. And England is usually the example of the country that has very strict gun laws, and these have been credited with producing a low rate of armed crime. And so as a historian, I thought it would be important to take a look at that and see whether, in fact, that was the case.
Now, what gave you the idea for the book, Professor?
Well, actually, I had written a book on the origins of the right to be armed, from looking at the English common law tradition and then its transference to America. And in fact, one of the reviewers of that book pointed out that during the Victorian era, England had a very low rate of armed crime, but guns were freely available, and someone should take a look at this. So I actually wrote to him and I said, you know, the records are there, it ought to be possible to be done. And we were going to do it together. And then he became a dean, and I carried on by myself.
So was that the extent of your research, or did you do even more in-depth research?
On this issue?
Yes,
Well, I had done quite a lot before, and I actually on this subject I went back to before guns actually came in to get a sense of what the level of violence was like before that, and took it right up to modern times, and then compared it to the American scene. So it was all a fair amount of research.
So a tremendous amount of research.
Yes, my head is crammed with statistics and
it was more than what you alluded to earlier.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the cornerstone point? What is the message of the book?
The message is that this, the example of England is not really an accurate example, because before England had any gun laws or restrictions at all, really, it had a very low rate of armed crime. For almost 500 years, the rate of violent crime in England was going down, despite peaks in the economy, despite wars and peace and different legal codes. And it went down until the 1950s. Gun restrictions didn't come in until the 1920s, and gun restrictions have become stricter and stricter until in 1997 they actually banned handguns. But once gun restrictions came in, violent crime started to go up, and since the 1950s, it's just spiraled. So it's all kinds of violent crime. It's not just gun crime. But the strict rules on guns haven't prevented it.
So what is the British government doing to combat it?
Alas. They keep trying to tighten the restrictions. They have, in 1997, as I said, they banned handguns. Now the police are pressing the government to ban toy guns, replica guns, because those could conceivably be used by some criminal, although they are also used by law-abiding citizens to scare off criminals. They're also proposing, and I think this is rather ominous, that in order to convict more criminals, they are going to eliminate the prohibition against double jeopardy, so you can be tried twice for the same crime. They're going to reduce the number of jury trials. They're going to allow hearsay evidence, and I'm sure that lawyers in your audience will realize how serious all of this is, because it's taking away the main props that for hundreds of years have protected people confronted with, a legal challenge to to a crime that they may or may not have committed. So these are things that have protected innocent people, and the government has really now decided to eliminate those protections in an effort to convict more criminals. And their jails are full, but they are unwilling to build any more jails until, as the Home Office Secretary said, prisons can show a better rate of rehabilitation. And, you know, so that apparently people are going to be released from jail or not put in jail until prisons can show that they're actually rehabilitating people.
Professor, can you give me some examples of how people in Britain have been affected by laws preventing them from having weapons to protect themselves?
Well, there have been some really serious ones. For instance, there, along with the idea that you can't have a gun, they also have, since 1953, prevented people from carrying any kind of weapon or article that they could use to protect themselves in a public place. That's anything you would use to protect yourself is considered an offensive weapon, and that's considered to be antisocial. The police are there to protect you. People are not to protect each other. They're supposed to wait for the police to do it, the professionals. So as an example, for instance, there was a fellow who was a British Petroleum executive in his 50s, and he was assaulted on a subway car in London, and these two men attacked him, and they were strangling him and bashing his head against the door of the car. Nobody came to his aid because presumably the professionals were to handle it. And he testified later that you know, his eyes were becoming blurry and his air was being cut off, and so he reached for a walking stick that he had that had an ornamental sword blade in it, and he sort of slashed at one of these fellows and got him with the sword blade, just wounded him. And the police arrested these two men for wounding, not attempted murder. And the fellow, the executive, was arrested for having an offensive weapon. A homeowner who surprised two burglars in his house held them with a toy gun while he called the police. And when the police came, they arrested the two men, and they arrested the man for causing someone to be afraid, terrifying somebody with a toy weapon. So, you know, I could give you other examples of it, but it really is, it's left people with very little way to protect themselves. The scope for self-defense has gotten narrower and narrower.
How do English rates of violent crime compare to those in America?
They've been going up markedly. There was a study done using 1995 figures by an American criminologist and a British criminologist, and actually funded by our Justice Department. And in the 1995 figures, for all types of violent crime except for rape and murder, the English were far higher. Since 1995, from 1997 to 2001, in fact, their rate of violent crime doubled. And for 9 consecutive years, ours has been going down. So theirs is much, much higher. You're 6 times more likely to get mugged in London than you are in New York. 6 times.
6 more times
Right.
more likely to get mugged in London than you are in New York.
And that's before the new figures, which are going to be much higher still for them.
I'd like to read an excerpt from last Sunday's Boston Herald, which reads, Rhode Island boy, 12 years old, shot to death, seeking help after bullet hit pal. A boy running to get help for a friend struck down by a bullet was killed when the gunman terrorizing their Providence housing project last Friday night circled back and shot him, too. Would gun control have prevented the death of these 2 kids? In other words, let me ask you this question, which I'm sure you've been asked many, many times. If this man terrorizing this housing project felt that there was even the remotest possibility that these people were licensed, registered gun owners, would this not have deterred him from terrorizing this apartment house?
Oh, I think it would. I mean, there actually have been studies done of convicted felons in which they have said that they're more afraid of armed homeowners than of the police. And in England, the rate of live burglaries, where people are home, is 53%, whereas in America it's only 13%. And that's because here the people are worried about homeowners being armed, and so they're very careful to make sure no one's home. Whereas in Britain, and also in Canada where they have strict gun laws, they don't care if someone's home. In fact, they'd rather you be home because then your alarm systems are off.
I can't help but think as a father, I mean, my children are grown, but we had 3 small children. If that had happened in my neighborhood to one of my children or a neighbor's child, and I felt that there was a susceptibility, a vulnerability of that happening again, I can assure you that I would definitely go out there myself and become a licensed gun owner and use that as a deterrent and almost, in effect, want to make it known that I have one. Because now that's a very highly personal thing, and I think a very thought-provoking thought to live with. And God, I can just imagine how the parents of these 2 kids feel. Two little boys, one 12 years old and one even younger. How do you protect your family, yourself, from nuts like this? What recourse do you have?
I think that it really is important to have some kind of way to protect yourself. Not everybody has to have a firearm, and but because some people can, people like this shooter have to be really careful, and you can't always rely on the police to be there. They can't be everywhere. I think the British are making it's not just a mistake, it really is a disservice to their people. I mean, I think government's first responsibility is public safety, and I think that's why this whole issue is too important to just leave to ideology. I think it really needs study. You really need to look at what works and what doesn't work. And having some kind of a deterrent really makes a difference. And you know, it's unfair to leave people defenseless.
Let me interrupt you if I may. My apologies for interrupting you. I just don't want to lose my thought. I would like to know, Professor, what, in your view, is the right or correct deterrent?
What particular weapon you mean? Or?
I don't know. I'm asking you the question. I don't know the answer.
Well, I guess there can be a variety of deterrents, but I think that the advantage of a handgun is that it works at a distance. You don't have to be a strong person. I mean, if you're relying on a knife or something of that sort, then it really does take strength. You can have one person be able to protect themselves against several, and often, you know, it's more than one person who mugs you. It almost always is. They like to have an advantage. So it has that advantage. One of my favorite little headlines was one from the New York Times some years ago in which it read, burglar shoves 92-year-old in gun closet and gets shot. And, you know, that 92-year-old would have had zero chance in any other way.
Sure.
But you know, it just showed that it really is an equalizer. And most of the time, people don't even need to use it. On something like 98% of the time, you just need to show it to the person and they back off.
Excuse me.